Hey, it's Mazzy. Welcome back to the channel. There is a segment of you, in fact, a large segment of you that keep requesting San Francisco psychedelia. And there's a percentage of you that say no more San Francisco psychedelia. But I thought this was an interesting conversation. Again, sometimes we rearrange things, repackage, put an extra track, an extra topic. This is 1968, and this is concentrating on really two albums. There's a couple others around as an opening act, maybe a morsel of a appetizer, an aperitif. 1968 Capitol Records. Capitol was a little late to the party. All the labels flocked to San Francisco in 66 and 67, especially around the time of the Monterey Pop Festival down in Monterey, south of San Francisco. We all know that Columbia came up and they would eventually sign Janis Joplin because of that Monterey. Janis Joplin, Big Brother and Holding Company, that Monterey Pop Festival, and of course Santana and It's a Beautiful Day. Those records came out a little later, and Capitol also was late to the party. Warner Brothers, who do they have? The Grateful Dead, and they put out that in 1967. They had Beau Brummels that they weren't very successful with, unfortunately. Vanguard Records, Country Joe and the Fish, Fantasy Records, who was local, obviously with Creedence Clearwater, so many others. But 1968, and this is the spring of 1968, I remember going to Stonestown Shopping Center, which was I think at the time, the only outdoor mall in San Francisco, right adjacent to San Francisco State College. And there was a record store there called Portals to Music, and it was in sort of one of the covered hallways that entered to the exterior plaza where you would have the various shops, and then on either end would be anchored by large department stores. But Portals to Music, I mentioned that before because one young man worked there who I didn't know by name at the time, Roy Loney, who would become a member of the Flamin' Groovies. And interesting enough, 10 years later in 1978, we would work together at ABC Records. So that's kind of a cool thing. Anyway, Portals of Music was kind of this cool store. Also, some old women seemed to run it. I wish I could know the history of that now, but they had this large, maybe there's two of them, as I recall, on either side of the door, exterior, big glass case window, display windows. And one day I was walking there and I loved the display they had. The display they had in the spring of 1968. Now, these two records were Capitol Records. I believe the first signings by Capitol in 1967 of two San Francisco of the psychedelic bands. And these records were released a month apart. And there was a major display in the window of these two records. The debut Quicksilver Messenger Service record and the debut of the Steve Miller Band record. Now, of course, I had been getting the handbills from the Avalon and the Fillmore in the mail at this point. And I would see their names around, and I would hear them on the radio on KMPX radio. The first underground Tom Donahue led rock station in San Francisco. And of course, I heard a lot of this stuff, and I heard their names, especially as I recall, Quicksilver Messenger Service was a name that appealed to me. But that display literally had a grid. I would learn later how to do merchandising in the record business, but a whole display of these two records. As I recall, I think this is the first time that I bought two records at once. 1968, I would turn 14, so at this point I was 13 and a half years old. Probably still had a little bar mitzvah money left, I don't know. And I would do odd jobs and do some work. I was a hard-working young lad, even back then. And I bought these records. Steve Miller Band put two records out in 1968. The other towards the end of the year, which was Sailor. And these are the two soul records that Boz Scaggs was still on. He was a friend, childhood friend of Steve Miller of Texas. Steve Miller told him to come out here. And I think he adds a nice opposite little layer to Steve Miller Band records. And of course, what's great about it, Steve Miller got some amazing contracts, something like a $60,000 advance budget for their first record, which in those days was a lot. Plus, I think he got a 5-record deal and then Capitol extended it, even though he wasn't a major seller. But, in those days, I talk about Warner Brothers, especially out of all the labels, would hold on to artists. Well, we all know Steve Miller did, what, 7, maybe 8 records before The Joker, before Fly Like an Eagle, before those records. The Joker, I guess, was the big major breakout where he kind of simplifies it. Another album that Capitol put out in 1968, I'm not going to dive into it. It was a band from Ohio, had moved to Berkeley in 1967, I believe, and that's Mad River. A different kind of record. I like this record a lot, but it never really kind of touched me like these other records. I don't know what it was about them. In fact, they didn't get a lot of radio play, as I recall. This is a cool record, though, if you ever see it. I mean, it goes for some money. It's not an unbelievably expensive record. I think Sundays at one point did a reissue of it. And there's another record that I'm going to just talk about briefly as an opening act because Capitol signed them as well. And they put out a single you could get free, and I have a copy of it. And it is a 7-inch single, 33 and a third single. Here's a picture of it right here with The Small Hole. And it's a song called Jesus is Coming by the Sons of Champlin. It's not on this album, but you could send away for it free. I did. I can't remember if it was through Capitol or the band or the radio station, but I did a mail-in and I have a copy of it. And it's one song that starts on the first side, you flip it over, it continues. And it's kind of a cool song. But this is the record. After they had to recall 100,000 copies because it said, what did it say? Not fuck off. Something it had fuck on here, and they had to recall it. So if you have a copy of it, I don't have my original copy anymore. Ironically, I upgraded a copy at some point. And so I didn't realize, or I forgot at the time that my original had that. So if you ever see it, it's down here somewhere in the white, I believe. And they fogged it out. So this album came out in 1969. So this is my opening act to the 1968 2 records I really want to feature. But this is a very favorite record of mine, so I shouldn't short shift it, but for the sake of this video, I'm going to call this the opening act again. A double album, very kind of pop psychedelia cover, great illustration paintings, this whole Yogi Phlegm thing. They changed their name of the band for like a year to Yogi Phlegm. Bad move. So they were the Sons of Champlin, second album was the Sons, and then Yogi Phlegm, and then back to the Sons and Sons of Champlin. They're together again after all these years. I don't know all the original members, but Bill Champlin later would finally make money, like 20 years later or 15 years later after this, joining the MOR segment of Chicago. And the irony there is this album came out in 1968 and the first Chicago Transit Authority came out. And they're both horn-based bands that put out double albums. That first Chicago album is amazing on Columbia Records, but this is more jazzy. I would say there's more soulful funk rock in the other album. There's rock on here, definitely, but there's a soulful vibe to this record and a jazzy vibe to this record, particularly because you literally have vibraphones on it, and it's so good. It's more of a psychedelic album, a jazzy psychedelic album that Chicago would ever be. Opens up with 1982-A, that song Bill Champlin, the lead singer, sings, and it's soulful. It has a great horn arrangement. He counts it at the beginning. The Thing You Do is great. Misery Ain't Free and Rooftop. Everywhere. Don't Fight It, Do It is sort of the lighter kind of, almost like a childlike song on here. But then it gets into the 7.5-minute song called Get High with sound effects of and a great vibraphone jam session. I just love that song. And as a 14, 15-year-old, when this album came out, it didn't entice me to take drugs. So my parents were pretty cool about this stuff back then. Hello Sunlight's probably one of the more commercial songs on here. Things Are Getting Better is nice too, but the side 4 is a 15-minute song called Freedom, and it's literally a perfect song of the time of 1968. So jazzy, rock, with a vibe, horns, but not exactly the same kind of direct horn arrangements that Chicago has. A wonderful record. This is their masterpiece, and I don't take that or say that lightly. I think it's a great album. Capitol finally got in the game in 1968 after, kind of delaying things. And I'm sure some of it was with management and taking their time and rehearsing. But let's talk about this album first, the debut of the Steve Miller Band. With that advance, they went to London to record. Steve Miller wanted to take the band to London. They went to Olympic Studios, and the engineer they brought on was Glenn Johns. And I think they had a monthly schedule for this, the whole thing. And after a couple of weeks, Glenn Johns was about to quit and leave. He said, "Look, if you want me to do this record with you," they're fucking around. They were doing all these experimentation things. Steve Miller had recorded a lot of demos in San Francisco, almost like avant-garde classical Stockhausen time sound effects and things, and wanted to do this really kind of out there thing. And he liked also a lot of the soul and tighter sounds of what was happening in America. And Glenn Johns wanted to rein it in a bit, make it a really good, solid record. We know his experience. And so finally, ultimatum, I'm going to produce it. So the first, 4 or 5 records are produced by Glenn Johns. At least the first 2, maybe even 3 are recorded in London. But they finally got it together. Boz Scaggs is on here. He leads 2 songs. He sings. In fact, one of my favorite songs on here is Baby Calling Me Home, with this great harpsichord that Ben Sidran plays. He would join the band sort of later. Was it on maybe Brave New World? I think he co-wrote Living in the USA with Steve Miller later. Dr. Jazz, he did a whole jazz series on VH1 years later. A great jazz artist in his own right. And his records, when he sings, the Ben Sidran's voice is very much like a Mose Allison style. An incredible musician. But obviously it has this wonderful psychedelic gatefold. But this is really good because it is this aural sensation. And as a young 15-year-old boy, I just loved how it builds up and slow. It's a slow simmer at the beginning of this. This is not an in-your-face thing. Also, a lot of the songs melt together, obviously influenced by Sgt. Pepper, kind of the first band that did that, the first record that did that. Of course, Satanic Majesties, and then all the psychedelic stuff from the late 67. At this point in America in 1968, hardly anything was released in mono. Pretty much everything in America was stereo. I know there are a few exceptions there and a few things that would come out, years later, mono versions of records that maybe had a small run of them. This is a great kind of sonic stereo record with foghorns and all these different sounds. Same with the beginning of Sailor. And maybe I'm thinking of that with the foghorns. But there is a vibe to this of ambient sonic noise, in a way, industrial sounds that bridge some of the songs together. But there is a bluesy feel to this. It is a blues album. In fact, the Steve Miller Band was originally called the Steve Miller Blues Band. Of course, we all love rainbow labels of Capitol. Those of us who grew up with this on the Beatles were very familiar with these labels. Children of the Future, Push Me to It, You've Got the Power, straight ahead 4-bar blues, but it works the way he arranges and produces this, and the way Steve Miller plays. I've always been a fan of Steve Miller's voice and his guitar playing. But you have a great band here, and I like that a couple of tracks, Boz Scaggs' voice sort of offset it so you don't get tired of Steve Miller's voice. Not that people would, but I think I missed it when he left after the second album. Although Steve Miller made those great first 5 records on Capitol are exquisite records. Search out on this channel. I have a video of the first 5 Steve Miller records, which I adore. Steppin' Stone, Boz Scaggs song. I'm Not Your Steppin' Stone. That's also a Boz Scaggs song. So the first 2 tracks on side 2 are Boz Scaggs songs. And then you do Key to the Highway, the standard blues song, Big Bill Brunsey song. The whole blues into psychedelia is not something that we didn't know about. Cream obviously was famous for it. The British bands would take those blues things, add wah-wah pedals and everything. Steve Miller, great guitar player, and this is a wonderful album. I think the first 2 Steve Miller Band albums, Children of the Future and Sailor, are just perfect records. This has that great song Quicksilver Girl, which is kind of a cool track on here. This happens to be a an import, a UK import, but I do have the original Capitol as well. Two great records by the Steve Miller Band. Now, the other record that I showed is the debut. Now, I did a video recently on their second album, which was the bigger seller. But this album is a special album. Not only is this, I always loved this great foil kind of cover, and obviously to get out one without ring wear is really difficult to have an original. This is my original copy. Considering it is that old, it's in really, really good shape. And I didn't keep my records in outer sleeves till probably 10 years ago when I started discogging, or within the last decade or so. I love the first two Quicksilver records. And some of you, if you know the history, you got these two great dueling guitar players of Gary Duncan and John Cipollina. And Cipollina would stand out, but Gary Duncan should get as much credit because they both had their unique sound of dueling guitars, interactive. But I would say The Fool, the final track on this album, is probably the best representation and the most amazing guitar solo that John Cipollina ever put on record. Of course, later he would go on with Terry and the Pirates and Copperhead, and he would play with his lifelong friend Nick Gravenitis from the Electric Flag, who co-produced this album with Harvey Brooks, a great bass player. So the record opens with Pride of Man, and it has that horn section from the Electric Flag with Harvey Brooks and Nick Gravenitis. What a great, that first Electric Flag out with Mike Bloomfield is an incredible record. That needs a sonic reissue because that original copy that I have is still rather muddy, and that was on Columbia Records. You got Pride of Man, written by the folk actor Hamilton Camp, and they do a great version with that horn section on here. Light in Your Window. There's a lot of hooks on here, more so than the Grateful Dead, even this first Steve Miller. There's like at least 3 songs that could have been singles of the day on here. Just very hook-based. Dino Song is another written by Dino Valente. Dino Valente was an original member of Quicksilver, but he got busted and went to jail, so he was off for the first 3 albums. And I kind of wish I don't wish someone to be in jail, but I think when he came back, he took over the band, even though they had bigger hits with Fresh Air, had another hit. That reverb-drenched sound was not the Quicksilver I loved. I loved the dryness of this record, mostly recorded in San Francisco, again, as I said, by Nick Gravenitis. The bluesy singer and Harvey Brooks, it's got a really tight sound. Beautiful recording. They had to re-record some of this, I understand. They had some issues with the sound they wanted. But again, that song, The Fool, that ends this record, is this 10-minute piece. And the way you listen to John Cipollina's SG with that that vibrato bar, it's amazing that he got that sound, because I kept hearing stories about that. With that, his guitar would hardly ever be in tune, stay in tune, and every time they would play live, they would take like 3, 4, 5 minutes for Cipollina just tuning his guitar. But he was able to bend the strings and then bend them back sort of in tune. And you can hear that growling sound he gets, that alligator-like sound, especially on that song. It's almost an instrumental, but then you get obviously Gary Duncan and Freiberg coming in on vocals later into the song, almost not till the last third of it or 2/3 into it. And it's a magnificent opus of a long track that really represents San Francisco psychedelia. It's a classic track. Another song on here it's a total instrumental is Gold and Silver, and it's like basically it's taken from Take 5 by the Brubeck, Dave Brubeck's album Take 5. It's got that same rhythm. If you know Take 5 and you listen to Gold and Silver, you have it. Different kind of melody, all guitar based, but again, Gary Duncan and John Cipollina just are on fire on that track. It's a wonderful, wonderful track on here. Too Long, again, is a really kind of a beautiful harmonics on here, harmony. I like, even though these vocals of Gary Duncan and Freiberg aren't as maybe technically perfect. I love these better than Dino Valenti. Dino Valenti has a wonderful, like, what is it, 1968, 69 album on Epic Records that Tom Wilson produced, a folk record. Reverb drenched, 12-string guitar. It's a brilliant album. I wish his folk career blossomed and let Quicksilver do this, because once they got into the 70s, they held up in Hawaii. The good thing is Nicky Hopkins shows up on those records and joins them for a time. Nicky Hopkins was like also the secret sauce for a lot of these San Francisco bands. He's on Steve Miller albums. He plays with Jefferson Airplane. He plays with Quicksilver. He was embedded with these bands, as well as, you know, the English things of John Lennon and George Harrison as well. This is one of the perfect San Francisco psychedelic covers. 1968, Capitol puts these records out. You got this long, beautiful hair of John Cipollina. I believe he died in 1989 of a disease. You got Gary Duncan, kind of the pretty boy of the band. You got David Freiberg hidden there. He would go on to join the Jefferson Airplane on the later, the last album, not my favorite album. And then he would become a member of the Jefferson Starship. And he's the sole remaining member of what still plays as this Jefferson Starship. All the power to him, you know, making a living as a musician, doing those Starship songs, those airplane songs, Quicksilver songs I think he mixes in as well. All the power to him. As much as I like the second album, their bigger seller with the live stuff of Happy Trails, this to me is the one that I gravitated onto. And I love that, unlike the later Dino Valenti-based Quicksilver, it's a dry recording, a very dry sound. And I think that's what makes it. When you hear Cipollina especially, but even Gary Duncan's guitar playing, there's virtually no, maybe none at all, added reverb to it. It has that great biting intensity that just I think is really wonderful on here. So Quicksilver Messenger Service, Capitol Records, 1968. They finally signed San Francisco bands. They finally get on the rock and roll bandwagon a little more, aside from the Beatles and the Beach Boys and maybe a few other of lighter pop records. They get the band also in 1968, so there's that too. But that's it. So thanks for watching. 1968 Capitol Records, San Francisco. Soho, London. Mazzy loves you.